The next video, we're going to focus on the Protestant Reformation. And this video you can play on the PowerPoint that I'm going to upload to Edmodo. So if you want to watch it again, you can play it there. I'm not going to play it for this right now. I just want to talk through the notes. And I'm really sorry if my voice sounds dry. It gets super dry when I'm doing these videos. It's not as fun as when I'm standing in front of you guys talking about it. In terms of the background, leading to the Protestant Reformation, we're going to see the Renaissance leads to people questioning different traditions and feeling like they can start thinking for themselves. Whereas in the Middle Ages, it was more just an emphasis on listening to and believing everything that the church tells you. And not that the church was always wrong, but in this time period, we see the church had so much power that it almost leads to a little bit of corruption. So here are some issues. We see some popes, bishops that are a little bit corrupt. The biggest issue for a lot of Reformation thinkers were the sale of indulgences or bills that would give you forgiveness and a ticket to heaven, usury, lending money at high interest rates, giving positions in the church for money, and then allowing kings to appoint whoever they want to be their bishops. These are some famous images of the Reformation, and they're specifically focusing on indulgences. And what's neat is these are being printed and distributed to people throughout Germany and France, and they're being distributed in this format because a lot of people still were not literate, and they didn't understand the issues that were going on. And so these images help them understand the problem with indulgences, and it lays out what this system looks like, the system of indulgences being sold and how unfair it was. In terms of opposing the church, we see some initial people come to the forefront. John Wycliffe is in England, and he's going to translate the Bible into English. He's going to find issues with the Pope and indulgences, and he's going to be charged with the common punishment for someone who spoke out against the church back then, and that was heresy. And then we see Jan Hus, who was Bohemian, which is in the region of Germany, and he's going to start a reform movement. He starts almost like his own church. He goes against the Catholic Church, and he's going to be excommunicated, tried for heresy, and then famously burned at the stake, which was a common punishment for heretics at the time, heretics. So here is a famous image that we see John Hus being burned at the stake. And again, this was printed and distributed to a lot of different people. The Catholic Church hoped it would spark fear, and to others who are supporting the Reformation, he's almost like a martyr. And those ideas are going to spread and come to the forefront under Martin Luther, who was a professor of theology. Before that, he was a German monk. He dedicated his life to the Catholic Church, and while he was a monk, he saw some things that he was doing wasn't really translating into being the devout Christian that he wanted to be. And the biggest problem that he saw was with indulgences. Paying money to be forgiven of your sins. He worked so hard to be forgiven of his sins when he was a monk that he felt like it was cheating the system, and he wasn't really a fan of it, and he got really upset. And he got so upset that he sat down and penned or wrote down 95 bullet points of problems that was going on with the Catholic Church. And these are called 95 Theses. He takes those 95 Theses and he nails them to the church door. And back then, if you wanted to open up a conversation about something, you could nail a question or something like that to the church door. But nailing this to the church door was an issue because it's basically nailing the Catholic Church with 95 complaints about them. Most of those complaints were about indulgences too, so you can tell how much he hates them. So these are just some funny images of Martin Luther, some funny memes. His arguments, and you need to know this for the SOL, so it's important to take note of this. He thought salvation should be achieved through having faith alone and practicing that faith, and not through sacraments or practices that you're going to do within a church. So salvation through faith alone, a belief that the word of God should be based on the Bible and not necessarily the word of the Pope. So you should have an understanding of the Bible on your own. you should be able to get that faith on your own, and the Bible should be available to everyone in vernacular, not just in Latin. So he wants people to have a personal relationship with Jesus, a personal relationship with the Bible, and not have priests as an intermediary between the two. In terms of technology, one of the reasons his ideas are going to spread so rapidly is because he nails his 95 Theses in 1517, and the printing press had spread like wildfire then. So his 95 Theses are going to be copied and distributed to a lot of people who are going to take on his ideas. And people are going to be able to get copies of the Bible to actually practice what Luther preached, where you read your own Bible and you study faith on your own rather than going to church. He is going to struggle with what happens with his movement. He sparks this revolution that he didn't even realize was going to happen, and it became known as the Protestant Reformation, or a wave of dissent or breaking away from or anger against the Catholic Church. By 1519, Luther publicly debated church doctrine with the Pope's representatives, and Pope Leo X is going to condemn him and threaten excommunication, and Luther boldly is going to say, well, you have problems, you need to face those problems, and he burns the letter of excommunication that was sent by the Pope, which is pretty bold. This is grounds for heresy along with a lot of other things, and the Holy Roman Emperor of the time is going to be Charles V. He's from the Habsburg family, but he's young. He's in his 20s. He hasn't dealt with this much, and he's going to have Luther put on trial in a city of Worms. It's called the Diet of Worms. Luther is going to be asked to recant all of his ideas, but he refuses to take back his views, and he forms his own religion, which is called the Lutheran religion. And the Lutheran religion is going to spread a lot in Germany. This is an image of Luther burning the papal bull. In terms of reactions to Luther's revolutionary movement, we're going to see the Protestant Reformation spread. We're going to see another reformer named John Calvin, based in France and Switzerland. And he's going to create a religion similar to Luther's, but even a little bit more strict. The religion is named after him. It's called Calvinism. His religion is going to spread in France and Switzerland. And his beliefs are, again, a bit more radical. He believes in something called predestination, where a certain number of people are already predestined to be saved by God before they're born. And in order to keep that predestination, you have to have a really extreme and strict faith. You need to have a righteous life. You have to work hard. You have to be honest. And if you're not, then that predestination will be taken away from you. This is called the Protestant work ethic. And there are groups like the Puritans or the Pilgrims who came to the Americas who were a branch off of Calvinism. And that's why you see how strict they are. For example, Puritans believed that if you looked at a woman's ankle, you were sinning. And they were that strict. And they believed when they were coming over on the Mayflower, if anything went wrong, they thought God was punishing them and they would throw people overboard. And so they're also the ones that would do Salem witchcraft trials. So predestination is a little bit more radical, but Calvinism is going to be a branch of breaking away from the Catholic Church. The reason these movements were so popular is because it's going to appeal to people who either wanted to break away from the Catholic Church for power, or people who were just living in poverty and who resonated with it a little bit more. So in terms of kings and noblemen and monarchs, they're going to feel connected to it because they want more power than the Pope had. And before this time, the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire had power over them. And finally, they see this as a chance to now have political power over the Pope. They're also going to oppose Italian dominance of the church. And they want new factions of the church. They want power in their own nations. And in terms of the middle class and commoners, we see in these new Protestant religions that all occupations and classes are a bit more equal, specifically because they can have a connection to God through the Bible and through their own faith and not have to be these prominent members of church. They joined because they were frustrated by the corruption that was going on with the church, and they were giving money to the church and that money wasn't being put in the right places. And they could finally read the Bible in vernacular and feel more connected to it. The Catholic Church realizes what's happening, and they realize new religions are forming. People are upset with Christianity. They don't want to fully change their religion, but what they do is they decide, you know what, we recognize maybe there are some issues, so let's try to fix those. And hopefully if we fix those, people will come back to Catholicism, and this Reformation movement will stop spreading so rapidly. And this is what we call the Counter-Reformation, or the Catholic Reformation, where the Catholic Church on its own is going to start responding, and they're going to start making their own reforms to hopefully please the people. They're going to strengthen training for clerical people like popes and bishops, and they're going to start making that discipline more strict. For example, popes were not supposed to they're supposed to remain celibate. They're going to try to set up standards so that happens. They hold a council called the Council of Trent. There's a couple other councils too. There's a Council of Constance. You guys can read about those if you want. But the Council of Trent, they're going to come up with some major things to reform the church. The first thing, Catholic leaders are going to reaffirm all of the doctrines and practices that began with Catholicism, and they're going to decide whether or not those are going to stay and how they're going to be practiced. They're going to correct a lot of the abuses, a lot of the corruption. They're going to get rid of and ban indulgences. And they're going to declare that, you know what? Reformation thinkers could be right. Salvation can be obtained through faith and good works alone, but we still think the church is an important place to come. In order to teach these new ideas, there's going to be a new body of people formed called the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus. So make sure you know that it's also called the Society of Jesus. It's a new Catholic order created in Spain by a man named Ignatius of Loyola. What he does is he gets together well-educated priests to counter all the teaching that's going on by the Protestants. So he's going to counter and send these priests around as missionaries to teach about the new Catholic Church that's been made by the Counter-Reformation. He is going to also want to spread Catholic doctrine around the world. This is where we start to see missionaries, or we call them Jesuits, being sent to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia, to try to convert those regions to Catholicism. If that doesn't work, we still see the use of Inquisition, or the famous Spanish Inquisition, where people who still refuse to reaccept Catholicism come back to Catholicism, or they start questioning Catholicism. They are sometimes punished in methods that will be forceful to get them to accept Catholicism. So if you're interested in the Spanish Inquisition, you can watch some videos on it.